The rain began to fall as Richard Mallory reached the hotel at the edge of the city. He had been driving through long stretches of road, and the dull orange glow of the hotel sign seemed like a beacon against the night. The building rose with worn brick walls and narrow windows that revealed nothing inside. He pulled his car into the lot, cut the engine, and sat in silence. The rain struck the windshield with steady rhythm, and the dim sign buzzed in the wet air. He felt an odd reluctance to leave the car, as if stepping out into the night would mean giving himself over to something he could not name. Still, fatigue pressed on him. He needed a place to sleep, and this was the only hotel within many miles. He opened the door, pulled his bag from the back seat, and walked quickly through the rain toward the entrance. The glass doors creaked as he pushed them open. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of old carpet and something harder to identify, like dust that had been trapped in the walls for years. A man stood behind the counter, tall with pale skin and a suit that seemed too tight across the shoulders. He looked up when Richard approached, and his eyes were strangely blank. "One night," Richard said. His voice sounded smaller than he expected in the wide, empty lobby. The clerk nodded. He did not ask questions. He reached for a brass key from the rack behind him and placed it on the counter. The tag bore the number 6. Richard paid in cash, and the clerk slid the bills into a drawer without counting them. There was no receipt, no registration card, no formality. The transaction felt unfinished, but Richard told himself that tiredness made him notice small things. He thanked the clerk and turned toward the hallway that stretched away from the lobby. The corridor was lined with faded wallpaper patterned with twisting vines. Dim bulbs flickered overhead. Richard counted the doors until he reached number 6. The brass numbers were slightly crooked on the dark wood surface. He fitted the key into the lock, turned it, and pushed the door open. The room looked ordinary. A queen bed stood against the wall, dressed with a quilt in muted tones. A small dresser sat across from it with a mirror above. Heavy curtains covered the window, keeping the rain outside from view. A desk with a single chair stood near the corner, and a lamp glowed on the nightstand. It looked clean enough, though everything carried the sense of having been used by many guests before him. He set his bag on the chair and sat on the bed, testing its weight. Springs gave slightly under him. He exhaled, relieved that the room felt solid, real, unthreatening. After a long day of driving, he needed nothing more. He unpacked lightly, leaving most of his things in the bag. He took out only a change of clothes for the morning and his toothbrush. When he walked into the bathroom, the mirror over the sink was spotted, its edges blackened with age. He stared at his reflection, noticing the deep shadows under his eyes. He splashed water on his face and tried to push away the odd heaviness that had followed him since stepping into the building. It was only the weather, he told himself, only exhaustion. Back in the main room, he turned on the television for noise. Static flickered on the screen before the picture resolved into an old movie. The sound was faint, the dialogue nearly lost under the hum of the set. He left it playing while he lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. He drifted between waking and sleep, his thoughts clouded, until a sound brought him back. It was faint. A low whisper, soft as breath, seemed to come from the wall near the bed. He sat up. The television murmured on, and the rain outside struck the glass. He listened. The whisper did not return. He shook his head, convinced he had been half asleep and hearing fragments of the movie. He lay back again. Minutes passed. He closed his eyes, drifting once more. Then he heard it again. A whisper, drawn out, sliding through the air. This time it was clearer, though not enough to form words. It came from the corner near the dresser. Richard pushed himself up on his elbows and stared. Nothing moved. He rose, walked to the dresser, and looked around it. The wall was bare. He pulled the drawer open. Empty. He pressed his ear against the wall, wondering if another guest occupied the next room. But the sound had not carried like muffled voices through plaster. It had been close, intimate, like someone leaning near his ear. He stood in silence for a long time. The television continued to play, but he barely heard it. His heart thudded. Then the whisper faded, leaving only the rain. Richard let out a breath. He told himself again that fatigue played tricks. He shut off the television and decided to sleep. He turned off the lamp, climbed into bed, and pulled the quilt over him. Darkness filled the room. The only sound was the rain and the faint ticking of the heater. His eyes adjusted, and he could see the outline of the dresser, the mirror above it catching a dull reflection from the faint light under the door. He turned on his side, trying to block it from view. Sleep tugged at him, but unease stayed in his chest. A sudden feeling made him roll back toward the dresser. his eyes fixed on the mirror. In the reflection, he saw the room as it was: bed, quilt, chair. But for a moment, he thought he saw movement in the corner behind him, a shift like someone stepping out of shadow. He sat up quickly, looking around. The room was empty. He turned back to the mirror. The reflection showed only what he already saw. He rubbed his eyes, breathing fast. The rain continued, steady and endless. He forced himself to lie down again. He needed sleep. His thoughts would not stop otherwise. He turned onto his side and pulled the quilt to his chin. His eyes closed, though his ears strained for sound. Time stretched. He slipped toward unconsciousness. A whisper came again, right at the edge of the bed. It was so close he felt his skin prickle. He opened his eyes in the dark. His pulse hammered. Slowly, he turned his head. No one stood there. The whisper had stopped. But the mirror across the room caught his gaze again, and what he saw tightened his throat. In the glass, the bed reflected back, and on it lay his own form, turned away as he was. But standing over the reflected bed was a figure. Tall, indistinct, darker than the rest of the shadowed room. It leaned slightly forward, as if staring at the sleeping man. Richard whipped around to face the spot beside his bed. Nothing was there. He looked back to the mirror. The figure was gone. Only the faint outline of himself on the bed remained. Richard pushed himself upright, trembling. He fumbled for the lamp and turned it on. Warm light filled the room. The mirror showed only himself, pale and wide-eyed, hair disheveled, sitting on the bed. He stared at his own reflection until the seconds passed into minutes. He did not lie down again. He stayed awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with the lamp burning. He told himself he would leave as soon as morning came. Outside, the rain did not let up. Inside, the silence pressed down, heavy and thick. He kept his eyes on the mirror, afraid to look away, afraid to see what might shift when he did. Hours crept by. At some point, exhaustion overcame even fear. His head drooped, his eyes closed, and he drifted into uneasy half-sleep with the lamp still on. He dreamed of voices whispering in a language he did not understand. He dreamed of hallways twisting deeper into the hotel, lined with doors that led nowhere. He dreamed of the mirror cracking slowly as dark shapes pressed against it from the other side. When he jerked awake, the lamp still burned. His body was stiff, his mouth dry. The clock on the nightstand said 3:30. He rubbed his face, unsure of how long he had slept. The rain had quieted. The room was still. He listened, every nerve alert, but the whisper did not return. He forced himself to believe it was done. He stood, stretched, and walked toward the bathroom. As he passed the mirror, he avoided looking at it. He flicked on the bathroom light and leaned against the sink. He splashed water on his face again, trying to wake fully. When he finally lifted his eyes to the mirror above the sink, his reflection stared back. But there was something different. The reflection did not match perfectly. His own face was pale, but in the mirror his eyes looked slightly too dark, his mouth curved faintly upward in a smile he was not making. Richard staggered back, hitting the wall. He looked away, then back again. The reflection returned to normal. His own frightened face, nothing more. He gripped the edge of the sink until his knuckles whitened. His breath came hard. He turned off the light and stepped back into the room, refusing to look at the larger mirror by the dresser. He sat on the bed once more, the decision firm in his mind. At first light, he would leave. No matter how tired he was, no matter how much rain still fell, he would not stay longer than this night. He stared at the curtains, waiting for the faintest hint of dawn. But the hours of night stretched long, and something in the silence of the hotel suggested that morning might never come at all. The faint hope of dawn never seemed to arrive. Richard sat upright on the bed, eyes heavy yet unwilling to close. He watched the curtains for change, expecting at any moment a thread of gray to pierce the dark. But the room remained suspended in endless night, the clock ticking slowly past 4. He rubbed his face, telling himself that exhaustion distorted his sense of time. Morning would come. He only had to endure. The lamp still glowed on the nightstand, casting steady light across the quilt, across the chair where his bag rested, across the dresser. He avoided turning toward the mirror above it, yet he felt its presence pressing on him. Every moment, his mind returned to the image of the figure leaning over his reflected body, the almost smile on his own mirrored face. He wanted to cover the mirror with the quilt, but the thought of approaching it filled him with dread. To stand before it again felt like stepping into a trap. The whisper did not return, yet silence brought no comfort. Silence made him feel watched. Each creak of the building sent tension through his chest. Each breath seemed too loud. He rose from the bed, restless, and began to pace the room. His eyes darted to the curtains. He thought of pulling them back, of proving to himself that the sky beyond was lightning, but he did not move them. The thought that something else might be waiting on the other side of the glass kept his hand away. Time dragged. He looked at the clock again. 4:30. Only an hour had passed. His body ached for rest, but his mind refused. He thought of returning to the car, driving away through the rain, but the idea of crossing the dark corridor, of passing the silent desk where the pale clerk had stood, filled him with as much fear as staying. He was caught between places, unwilling to remain and unwilling to leave. Finally, as if against his own will, his eyes slid to the mirror. He told himself he would only glance, only confirm that nothing waited there. His gaze landed on the glass, and his throat tightened. The reflection was not wrong in an obvious way. The bed, the chair, the lamp all matched what stood behind him. But there was a delay. When he moved his arm, the reflected movement followed a fraction too late. His reflection blinked after he did, not with him. He stared, frozen, as his mirrored self raised its head more slowly, its eyes fixing on him with a strange intensity. He stepped back. The reflection lingered at the dresser, not retreating with him. Then, with a suddenness that stole his breath, the reflection smiled. The smile was wide, sharp, filled with knowledge. It was not his face any longer, though it wore his features. Richard stumbled back against the bed. He turned his head away from the mirror, clamping his eyes shut. His pulse pounded in his ears. When he forced himself to look again, the reflection had returned to normal. His own pale, terrified expression stared back at him, perfectly in sync. He sank to the floor beside the bed, burying his face in his hands. He told himself over and over that he was imagining it, that exhaustion bent his perception. Yet the image of that smile burned behind his eyes. He stayed on the floor until the ache in his knees forced him up again. He sat on the bed's edge, gripping the quilt in tight fists. The clock ticked forward. 5:30. Still no sign of dawn. He thought he heard movement outside the door, a shuffle of footsteps in the hallway. He froze, listening. The sound was faint, steady, moving past his room. He held his breath until it faded. Relief came, then dread returned. No guest should be wandering halls at this hour. He remembered the silent lobby, the empty lot when he arrived. Was anyone else here at all? Driven by sudden need, he rose and pressed his ear to the door. The wood was cold. Silence stretched on the other side. He hesitated, then pulled the bolt, turned the knob, and opened the door a crack. The corridor stretched in both directions, lit by weak yellow bulbs. No one stood there. The patterned wallpaper seemed darker, the vines twisting like veins. He stepped back, shutting the door quickly, sliding the bolt across. He felt no safer for it. He felt as if something had noticed his attempt to look beyond. The urge to leave grew stronger. He gathered his bag, slung it over his shoulder, and moved to the door again. His hand hovered on the bolt, but he could not move it. He felt watched not only from the hall, but from inside the room as well. The mirror pressed against his back like a gaze. He turned and saw it across the room, reflecting his own shape by the door. But behind his reflection, in the shadows near the bathroom, he thought he saw another shape. He spun to look. Nothing. He looked back at the mirror. The shape was gone. Only himself remained. He dropped the bag to the floor. His legs shook. He no longer trusted his senses. To open the door might mean stepping into something worse. He sat on the bed again, burying his face in his hands. He stayed like that until he felt numb, until he no longer knew how much time had passed. When he looked up, the lamp flickered. The bulb dimmed, brightened, then dimmed again. The air grew heavier, thick with a smell he recognized only after a moment. Metal. Risht. The faint tang of old blood. His stomach tightened. He rose, eyes darting around the room. The smell grew stronger near the bathroom. He stepped toward it slowly, each foot dragging. He reached the doorway and peered inside. The bathroom looked unchanged. Sink, mirror, toilet, shower curtain drawn across the tub. But the smell was overwhelming now. His throat burned with it. His hand reached for the shower curtain without his consent, trembling as he pulled it aside. The tub was empty. White porcelain, chipped and clean. He let out a shaky breath. He pulled the curtain closed again and turned away. Then he froze. In the mirror above the sink, the tub was not empty. In the reflection, dark water filled it halfway. Something pale floated beneath the surface, hair fanning out like weeds. A face turned upward, eyes open, mouth slack. He staggered back against the doorframe, his heart lurching. He forced himself to look at the actual tub again. Empty. He turned back to the mirror. The body was gone. He clutched the frame until his fingers ached. He whispered to himself that he was hallucinating, that fatigue had broken his mind. He backed out of the bathroom, keeping his eyes away from the mirror, and returned to the bed. He sat trembling, gripping the quilt. He wanted to scream, but fear sealed his throat. The clock read 6. Still no light pressed through the curtains. The rain had stopped, leaving the air unnaturally still. He rose and moved toward the curtains. His hand shook as he reached for them. He had to know. He had to see what lay beyond. He pulled them open. The window revealed not the parking lot or the road. Instead, he saw a brick wall, close and unbroken, as if the window opened onto nothing. The bricks were damp, dark with moss. He staggered back. He pulled the curtains closed again, as if that could erase what he had seen. His breath came ragged. He was trapped. The hotel had sealed itself around him. A sound rose then, soft but distinct. The whisper again. Not from the walls this time, but from the mirror. He turned slowly, dread thick in his veins. The mirror shimmered faintly in the lamplight. His reflection stood within, but it did not move with him. It stepped forward, closing the distance to the glass. Its eyes locked on his, cold and intent. The whisper grew louder, forming shapes of words he could not understand. The reflection raised a hand and pressed it against the inside of the mirror. The glass rippled like water. Richard backed away until his legs hit the bed. His reflection pressed harder, and the glass bulged outward as if it would break. The whisper swelled, filling the room. He clutched his head, trying to block it out. The lamp flickered again, then went dark. Shadows swallowed the room. The only light came from the mirror, glowing faintly from within. The reflection leaned forward, its face close to the glass. The whisper stopped. In silence, its lips moved. Though no sound came, Richard understood the shape of the word. His name, spoken by something that was not him. Richard's name echoed in his skull though no sound touched the air. He stared at the mirror, his chest heaving, his body stiff with terror. The reflection pressed its hand against the glass, and faint cracks began to spread outward, thin white lines that glowed faintly. He thought the mirror would shatter, releasing whatever waited inside, but just as suddenly the cracks faded and the reflection withdrew. The glass stilled. Only his own frightened face remained, trembling and pale. Richard fell back onto the bed, gasping. Sweat soaked his shirt. He stared at the ceiling, fighting to steady his breath. He told himself he was breaking down, that the long drive, the storm, and the sleepless night had twisted his mind. He repeated it again and again, but the memory of the whisper, of the cracks spreading like veins, refused to fade. He closed his eyes, but images flashed behind his lids. The body in the tub, the brick wall beyond the window, the smile on his mirrored face. He forced himself up, pacing the room. He had to leave. No matter what waited outside the door, it could not be worse than this. He grabbed his bag, gripping it tightly, and unbolted the door. The corridor stretched ahead, dim and quiet. He stepped into it, heart pounding. The carpet muffled his footsteps, though the air seemed to carry the sound farther than it should. The walls pressed close, their patterned vines curling like tendrils. He passed door after door, each marked with brass numbers. None looked different, yet he felt each one watching. He reached the lobby. The desk stood where it had before, but the clerk was gone. The lamp behind the counter was dark, leaving the space in shadow. He looked toward the glass entrance, but his chest tightened. Beyond the doors there was no night sky, no parking lot, no rain-slick road. Only darkness, thick and impenetrable, pressed against the glass as if the world outside had been erased. Richard backed away, his breath quickening. He turned toward the desk, hoping for a phone, anything. A black rotary phone sat on the counter. He snatched the receiver and held it to his ear. At first there was only silence, then a faint hiss, then whispers. The same voices he had heard in the room, low and countless, speaking words he could not grasp. He slammed the receiver down, the sound echoing through the empty lobby. He turned toward the hallway again, but it looked longer than before, stretching into darkness. The thought of returning to his room filled him with dread, yet he could not stay in the lobby. He walked quickly down the corridor, his eyes darting. He passed door number 6, but when he looked at it, the brass numbers were gone. The wood was bare, as if no one had ever marked it. He moved farther, counting the doors. 7, 8, 9. Yet the corridor continued. He walked faster, his breath ragged, until he reached a stairwell at the end. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was colder here, smelling of mildew. Concrete steps led both upward and downward. He hesitated, then chose to go down, hoping it would lead to an exit. The stairwell descended farther than it should. Each flight felt the same: concrete walls, rusted railings, dim bulbs flickering above. He lost track of how many he had passed. The sound of his footsteps echoed unnaturally, as if more feet moved with him. He stopped once, listening, but the echoes continued for a moment before fading. Finally, he reached a landing with a heavy door. He pushed it open and stepped into a basement hallway. The walls here were bare brick, damp with moisture. Pipes ran overhead, dripping occasionally into puddles on the floor. The air was colder, the smell of rust stronger. He walked slowly, his shoes splashing in shallow water. At the end of the hall, another door waited, its paint peeling. He pulled it open, and a larger room spread before him. It looked like a storage area, filled with broken furniture, old mattresses, and discarded lamps. Dust lay thick over everything, but on the far wall, shapes had been drawn. Dark shapes, crude and uneven, as if painted with hands instead of brushes. Figures bent and twisted, mouths open in silent screams. Eyes crowded together in clusters, watching. Richard backed away, but his foot struck something. He looked down and saw a suitcase, old and worn, the leather cracked. He crouched and unlatched it. Inside lay clothing, neatly folded but covered in mold. Beneath them, a wallet. He opened it. The driver's license inside bore a name he did not know, a man's face pale with time. The date showed it had been issued nearly 20 years ago. The edges were stained dark. He dropped it back into the case, his hands shaking. He turned and saw more suitcases stacked against the wall. Some were open, spilling clothing, shoes, personal items. Dozens of them abandoned. His stomach tightened as he realized what it meant. Others had stayed here. Others had tried to leave. None had succeeded. The air grew colder. He heard the whisper again, louder now, filling the basement. He turned in circles, searching for the source. The shadows between the piles of furniture seemed to deepen, shifting as if something moved within. He stumbled back toward the door, heart hammering, but when he reached it, the handle would not turn. The door was locked. The whispers rose, overlapping, rushing through the room. He pressed against the door, pulling, but it held firm. He pounded on it, shouting, but his voice was swallowed by the sound. Then the whispers fell silent all at once. A low groan echoed through the room, like wood bending under weight. He turned slowly. In the far corner, a mirror stood propped against the wall. Its frame was cracked, its surface spotted with age, but within it glowed faintly. His breath caught. He stepped back, but his feet would not obey. The mirror pulled his gaze, holding him. Shapes moved within the glass. Not reflections, but shadows shifting, twisting, pressing against the surface. Faces emerged, pale and distorted, mouths opening in silent cries. Hands reached forward, pressing against the glass from inside. The surface rippled. Richard tried to look away, but his body would not move. His legs felt heavy, his arms limp. He could only stare as the figures inside the mirror drew closer. One face pressed against the surface, its eyes hollow, its skin gray. Its mouth moved, forming words. This time he understood them. They do not leave. The words were clear, inside his head, sharp as knives. He shook his head, whispering no. The figure pressed harder, its hands spreading cracks across the surface. They stay. You stay. The whisper swelled into a roar, hundreds of voices at once. The mirror shook. The cracks spread wider. Richard tore his gaze away at last, hurling himself toward the piles of furniture. He shoved at them, searching for another door, another passage, anything. Dust rose, choking him. He clawed at the walls, but they were solid brick. He turned back. The mirror was splitting open. Shards fell to the floor, but inside was not empty. Behind the breaking glass was darkness deeper than night, and within it shapes moved, writhing, reaching. Pale arms stretched outward through the widening gap. Faces pressed forward, their mouths open in voiceless screams. Richard stumbled back, his heart pounding so hard he thought it would burst. He grabbed a broken chair leg from the floor and hurled it at the mirror. The glass shattered, collapsing in a spray of fragments. For a moment, silence fell. The dark within pulsed, then collapsed inward, swallowing the room in shadow. When light returned, the mirror was gone. The wall behind it was bare brick. The whispers had ceased. The room lay silent. Richard stood trembling, the chair leg clutched in his hand, shards crunching under his shoes. He did not understand what had happened, only that something had been broken, something that might have been holding back what he could not face. He turned to the door again. This time, when he twisted the handle, it opened. He stumbled back into the basement hall, gasping. He ran up the stairwell, his legs weak but driven by terror. Flight after flight, his breath burning, until he burst into the corridor above. The hallway stretched long again, lined with doors. But now the wallpaper was torn, peeling in strips, revealing dark stains beneath. The bulbs flickered, casting the corridor in pulses of light and dark. He turned toward where the lobby should be, but the hallway bent, twisting into another passage. He realized then that the hotel had no fixed shape. It shifted, rearranged, trapping him deeper. He staggered forward, no longer sure where he was going, only moving to keep from collapsing. The whispers began again, faint and far, rising slowly. He knew then that the mirror had not been destroyed. It had only spread. He reached another door at the end of the passage. Numbers hung crookedly on its surface. 6. The same number as his room. He stopped, chest heaving, staring. He turned slowly, looking back. The corridor was empty, stretching farther than his eyes could see. He looked again at the door. His hand lifted against his will, reaching for the knob. The whispers swelled. Richard's hand hovered on the knob of the door marked 6. His body trembled, yet he could not pull away. The whispers swelled inside his skull, a chorus pressing against his thoughts, guiding him forward. His fingers closed around the metal. It was cold, colder than any metal should be, as if drawn from a winter river. He twisted. The latch clicked, and the door swung inward without sound. The room beyond looked identical to the one he had left. The same quilt, the same chair, the same lamp on the nightstand. Yet something was wrong. The light had no warmth. The shadows stretched too long, bending unnaturally across the floor. He stepped inside, his breath shallow. The door shut behind him with a soft thud, sealing him in. He turned. The mirror above the dresser glowed faintly, though no lamp lit it. His reflection stood within, but it was not him. The figure in the glass was thinner, hollow-eyed, its skin sagging as if drained of life. It stared at him with unbroken focus. Richard stumbled back until his legs hit the bed. The reflection raised its hands slowly. Its lips moved. This time the whisper did not echo in the air, but directly inside his mind. "You see now. You know where you are." Richard shook his head, his voice cracking. "I don't want this. I didn't choose this." The reflection tilted its head, the faint trace of a smile curling its mouth. "They never chose. They were taken. As you were." The whispers swelled again, and with them came images flooding Richard's mind. The room dissolved around him. He saw flashes, faces of men and women from different decades, their eyes wide with terror, their mouths open in silent screams. He saw them lying on the same bed, standing before the same mirror, staring at the same shadows. He saw the mirror crack, the dark reach for them, and then nothing. The images shifted. He saw the hotel as it had once been, new and bright, with shining floors and fresh paint. Guests arrived smiling, families carrying suitcases. But beneath the surface of the walls something moved, something hidden. The foundation had been poured over ground that pulsed with shadow. The first owner had known. He had fed it. One by one, guests disappeared. Their belongings filled the basement. Their names vanished from records. The building swallowed them, keeping their echoes in mirrors and whispers. Richard's knees buckled. He fell to the floor, clutching his head. "Why me?" he whispered. The reflection leaned closer. "You came because it called. It always calls. When the night is heavy, when the road is long, it shows itself. You saw the light, and you entered." "No," Richard gasped. "I can leave. I'll find a way." The reflection's eyes gleamed. "There is no leaving. There is only joining." The room shifted. The mirror rippled, and from its surface hands began to press forward. Pale gray reaching. Faces followed, pressing against the glass as if straining to break through. Their mouths opened in endless cries, though no sound came. Richard staggered back, but the bed caught him. The hands reached farther, stretching into the room. He lunged for the door, but when he pulled it open, another mirror stared back at him. His own reflection filled it, though distorted, its features twisting with a grin. He slammed the door shut, but the mirror above the dresser glowed brighter, pulling him back. The whispers grew louder, layered voices rising into a wail. He clamped his hands over his ears, but it made no difference. The sound was inside him, burrowing deeper. The mirror figures pressed harder, cracks spreading across the glass like spiderwebs. Richard grabbed the chair and hurled it at the mirror. The glass shattered, spraying shards across the floor. For a moment, silence fell. He gasped, his chest heaving. But the shards on the ground glowed faintly. In each piece, a reflection stared back, his own face, but twisted, smiling, eyes hollow. The voices spoke again, hundreds at once. "You cannot break it. You only divide it." The shards trembled, then slid across the floor, pulling toward one another. They rose into the air, spinning, reforming. The mirror knitted itself together, glowing brighter. From within, the dark shapes surged forward. Richard screamed and rushed to the curtains. He tore them open, desperate for escape. Beyond the glass was no brick wall now. Instead, darkness stretched without end, a void swallowing all light. He pounded on the window, but the glass held firm. The darkness pressed against it like liquid, shifting and pulsing. Faces appeared in it, eyes wide, mouths open. They stared at him from the void. He fell to his knees, his body shaking. "Please," he whispered, though he did not know to whom. The mirror pulsed behind him. He turned slowly. His reflection stepped forward, emerging halfway from the glass. Its form was solid now, though wrong, its movements too smooth, its smile too wide. It reached out a hand. "You're already here. Stop fighting. Become." Richard pressed back against the wall, his nails scraping the plaster. He shook his head, tears streaking his face. "I won't. I won't." The figure tilted its head, then stepped fully into the room. Its eyes glowed faintly, filled with something ancient and cold. It advanced slowly, its hand reaching. Richard scrambled along the wall, but there was nowhere to go. The whispers rose to a scream. The mirror behind the figure rippled, and more shapes began to emerge. Dozens of them, faces hollow, eyes black. They spilled into the room, filling it with their presence. The air grew suffocating, heavy with rot and metal. Richard dropped to the floor, his body weak. His vision blurred, his breath ragged. The figure knelt before him, placing its cold hand on his chest. The whispers stopped. Silence fell like a weight. In that silence, the figure spoke with his own voice. "You were always going to stay." Richard's eyes widened. His body convulsed. The room spun. He felt himself pulled, not outward but inward, drawn into the cold, into the mirror, into the void. He struggled, but his limbs no longer obeyed. His vision dimmed. The last thing he saw was his own body rising to its feet, calm and still, the hollow-eyed reflection wearing his face. The world snapped into darkness. When Richard opened his eyes again, he was standing in the lobby. The air was silent, the walls still. He looked down at his hands. They were pale, faintly translucent. The desk stood before him, and behind it, the pale clerk waited, unmoving. Richard tried to speak, but no sound came. The clerk's blank eyes lifted, meeting his. Another guest checked in, the clerk said in a flat voice. Another room filled. Richard turned. Through the glass doors, the night stretched forever, rain falling against nothing. He tried to move, but his body was slow, heavy-bound. He felt the hotel around him, vast and endless, its halls twisting, its mirrors watching. He knew then that he was part of it, another echo caught in its walls, another whisper in its endless night. Upstairs, a lamp flicked on in room 6. A new traveler stepped inside, weary from the road, relieved to find a place to rest. Richard tried to scream, but the sound was only a whisper.